opinion on that is that the undergraduate curriculum should be very disciplinary in its focus. So I think material science and engineering as a discipline is already interdisciplinary. Some chemistry, there's physics, there's some electronics, as a natural part of the curriculum. But beyond that, I think it's really important as an undergraduate to develop a very deep sort of disciplinary expertise, and that the interdisciplinary component of the overall educational experience is probably better obtained during the graduate student period. So as a master's student or as a PhD student, where you've already developed that core competency, that core knowledge base in materials science. And then as a part of your research efforts, you can engage in collaborative interactions where you obtain that interdisciplinary skill set via the process of going through your research projects in a collaborative mode. So I think you don't want to lose the disciplinary basis of expertise. And as a result, I think the core undergraduate curriculum should be traditional in some sense, really focus on the materials, supplemented by maybe cross-listed courses. You want to learn something about machine learning. Maybe you obtain that knowledge by taking a course in computer science, for example. You want to know some electronics, you take that in double E. But I think as a department, the emphasis, this is my opinion, should really be on the core science around materials and engineering aspects of the use of materials. That'd be my opinion on it. So it'd probably be a really long answer to that question, because I think the core itself is pretty broad. So maybe it's arguing even more for that disciplinary focus, because there isn't a lot of room to add additional courses outside of those associated with traditional materials science. But I think as a materials scientist, you're really kind of focused on structure, property, relationships. So all kinds of characterization techniques become important, and synthetic procedures and strategies around how to create materials and then how to study their properties. Thermodynamics has to be a really important piece. Traditional classes of materials, metals, ceramics, polymers, there have to be courses in those areas. I think that it's important to have a strong kind of laboratory component as well for the undergraduate experience, because I think more and more these days, classroom learning that kind of education can be obtained in many different ways, but I think the value of the university environment is to go beyond just classroom instruction to include, a heavy laboratory component, and to open up research experiences for undergraduates as well, so they can do engage in some open-ended sort of materials science oriented investigations. Maybe a thesis option becomes really important. But the core is pretty much well defined. I don't know there's a lot of debate on what constitutes the core of materials science as a discipline, and I would pretty much agree with how that's already defined. And again, I think maybe more modern topics that would be relevant to sort of consider is whether sort of a materials-oriented machine learning course should be added to the core. That would be an example, because I think semiconductors, metals, ceramics, polymers, that all has to be there. And I don't think a lot has changed over time in the sense of that scope over the last 10 years, let's say. Maybe biomaterials is another relatively recent class of material that needs to be included in that core. But I think machine learning and artificial intelligence really is appearing to be really a core competency that probably at some point needs to be integrated into that core curriculum. So that would be an example where maybe it needs to expand a little bit, beyond what it has been in the past. And I think a lot of the undergraduate students are growing to expect that kind of content. And that if you don't offer it, then maybe you start losing undergraduates to other majors. And so you really need to modernize from that standpoint. But I think it has to be added in. It can't be a replacement for some other core components of the curriculum. That really needs to remain in place. That would be my opinion. I would say it's pretty random, pretty much opportunistic, like kind of going with your gut in a sense, like what feels interesting and what kind of research could potentially have a broader impact. I've always been interested in thinking about scientific questions whose answers lead to new technologies that could be of broader benefit to society. So I'm very much not a traditional kind of ivory tower academic. I love asking fundamental questions, but if it's not in a topic area that could potentially at some point in the future lead to something, I would rather not study that question, study some other question where there's a clear pathway. So it's not product development at that level, but at least thinking on like a 5-10 year time scale, kind of where things are going, but not, with the idea of a rigid 5 or 10 year plan, because I think that sort of diminishes the opportunities to go after, topics that you might not have even thought about, and they're presented to you either through interaction with a collaborator or someone, who's aware of your research, and you start having conversations and you kind of brainstorm. You want to make yourself open to change, I guess would be the point. And a rigid structure around your career doesn't really allow for that. And so that's always been my kind of thought process around how to build out a career. Do things that you're personally excited about and things that could have broad impact. I think that's kind of a guiding consideration or pair of considerations. And so, I think partly as a result of that, I started my career at Bell Laboratories, which I think is probably the lab that most effectively brought together science and engineering in the context of outcomes that have really shaped our world, right? So it's Nobel Prize winning scientific research, but the kind of research that leads to the transistor, or the laser, the fiber optic cable, or information theory. That is like super powerful. And I think that Bell Labsian style is something that I've tried to carry with me now that, I'm in an academic position, and we won't ever be able to reproduce that kind of Bell Labs environment necessarily, but with that kind of perspective and that type of mindset. And I think it turns out to be really appealing to the students as well, because I think it's harder for them to understand the point of doing research if there isn't some kind of connection to a technology or an engineering outcome that they can kind of appreciate. I think if the research is being done within that kind of framework, it's a lot easier for the students to engage and learn and sort of think about things. So I think that's been my perspective, but I think the most productive students that I've come across kind of tend to have a similar mindset. And so over time, the most productive students in the group are guiding kind of the direction and the path that your group is following almost by definition, because they're going to be the most productive. They're generating the most data. That data is most easily fundable, and then it just kind of builds on itself in a sense. So as a supervising faculty member, I kind of have an idea of where I want things to go, but it needs to also be resonant with the most passionate, productive students, because they're ultimately kind of drive things forward. So it's a little bit of a feedback loop, I guess, in how things play out. But that's kind of the way that things have gone for me. So when I got my career start at Bell Labs, I never would have imagined that we would be doing body-worn, physiological monitors for premature infants. Like, there was no way I could have projected that or mapped that out. But I think because, I've allowed, my career to move in kind of an opportunistic manner, we've ended up in a really good spot, in terms of like what we're hoping to accomplish. And I think back to your question about disciplinary focus versus interdisciplinary mindset, I think a lot of our research is built around, thinking about problems that need to be solved rather than puzzles that need to be solved. We're not solving puzzles, we're trying to solve problems that are meaningful. And if that's your mindset, the core disciplinary expertise is super important in that sense, but you have to be able to move beyond your discipline, because if you're trying to solve problems, it's not going to be solved by just a new material. It's going to be a new material in a device structure that's manufacturable in the context of a set of requirements that need to be satisfied. So I think being able to work beyond your disciplinary expertise is really important in that sense. And I think we collaborate pretty effectively, and understanding how to communicate with people who have knowledge base or a skill set that's complementary to your own is a really important skill. And for the students in my group, they get a real opportunity to hone that skill and begin to understand how to do that. And I think over time it becomes very valuable as they move into their own independent career. So I think it's an important part of the educational process, how to think about structuring your career. And I try to manage the group in kind of a very loose, flexible way that gives the students the ideas to create their own ideas and directions, and to collaborate in an effective way. So that's kind of how I think about it. Other people may structure their careers in different ways, and that can be effective too, but this is my own experience and kind of how things have evolved for me. Well, maybe just start with a more general comment about material science and engineering as a discipline. I mean, I think it's the one area of engineering that really explicitly combines science and engineering, and materials being the foundation of any engineering pursuit. I think it's a kind of a wonderful field of study, right? In a lot of ways, it's combining physics and chemistry and all kinds of really, really interesting concepts, and design engineering and so on. And so, but it's a relatively recent discipline as well, because as you mentioned, at least the department here resulted from a merger that happened in '95 or something like that. I think for University of Illinois, where I got my academic career start, similar type of story. It was metals and ceramics that were joined. And at that time, nobody really even appreciated soft materials as being an important component of the material science discipline. So I think the ceramicists were worried that the metallurgists were going to take over and vice versa. And they didn't see this whole other aspect of materials, growing so rapidly. So the field has evolved in different ways that are pretty interesting. And I think partly because of that intrinsic kind of interdisciplinarity within this discipline, it creates a lot of flexibility in terms of how the department manages itself and how they think about hiring. By comparison, like physics department, very traditional, very dogmatic about what is physics and what is not physics. I don't think the material scientists have that problem. They're thinking more about what are interesting problems in science and engineering, and almost everything involves materials. So come on in, if you're a great researcher and you can kind of fit in. And so there's an incredible kind of diversity, in that sense. And it's sort of interesting because when I was coming up as an undergraduate, material science did not really exist as a identifiable, clearly, delineated academic discipline. And so I guess I kind of, in retrospect, intuitively kind of created my own material science major, because I was double majoring in chemistry and physics. I knew I liked physics, I liked chemistry, but I really liked to think about like the physics of chemical compounds. And so that was material science, but there wasn't a material science major, right, when I was an undergraduate from 85 through 89. So it was a long time ago, prior to the formation, I guess, of the department here. So anyway, a little bit of background. I trying to figure it out on my own, and then did 2 master's degrees in in chemistry and physics before getting my PhD in physical chemistry. But I think if I had to do it all over again these days, I go straight into material science and engineering and stay there the whole way. But I think the strength of the department here is really kind of a reflection of the strength of the discipline itself. I mean, a lot of these attributes are reflected very strongly, in the faculty here. You have a very large faculty, so you have incredible critical mass and breadth of expertise, and you have a large undergraduate student body as well. So I think size is a powerful asset overall, and I think that's a key advantage in terms of what you have going on here. But you have exceptional people too. I mean, I think the kind of undergraduate students that you get here at Seoul National are really spectacular, and I've benefited from a lot of those students who've come over to my group and pursued a PhD or decided to do a postdoc in my group. And so I see it firsthand. I mean, some of my best students, have come from Korea. I mean, that's just the empirical reality of it over time. And they've continued on independent careers and doing spectacular things. It's really fun to see that. I think that's ultimately a reflection of this department and what's going on here. And so it's attracting some of the very best people, not only at the student level, but at the faculty level as well. I think, people who are offered choices at different universities seem to be gravitating to Seoul National if they have that as an option, right, for taking their career. So I think ultimately it's probably the people are probably the most impressive asset of what I see here, in this department. I think lots of places have great facilities and great labs and things like that, and good funding. But ultimately, I think it's the personnel, the people are the real distinguishing feature of what I'm seeing here at the department. Yeah. Well, first of all, I think I would communicate to them the fact that they've chosen a great major. I think it's a wonderful way to develop a base of scientific expertise. I think material science and engineering, as we were discussing before, it's a great combination of many more traditional fields of study, and it'll form a very powerful foundation for whichever direction they ultimately want to take their career. And so I would also say to them that your time as an undergraduate is a very special kind of moment in your life. Graduate student experience is also very special and very unique, kind of in a different way. And what you might not realize at this moment is how unique it is, in fact, and you should take advantage of that, because over time your life will get more and more complicated and more encumbered with all kinds of different commitments. And so at this particular time in your life, it'll be one of the only moments where you can really focus all of your energy on learning at the highest levels. And I would say, take advantage of it, enjoy it, but work hard also, and do whatever you can to kind of maximize the experience, because it'll only come once. This will never happen again. You got 4 years, just study, learn as much as you can, interact with your faculty, advisors and your student colleagues, and enjoy that, and think about it kind of in that way. That would be my message to the undergraduates, and to the graduate students. It'd be similar in a sense, that this will be the only moment in your life where you can just throw yourself into the lab and think about nothing else but like deep scientific questions, and think about solutions to engineering challenges, and the rest of your career will be rewarding, but in much different ways, and this time will never come again. And so enjoy it and take advantage of it. I see various types of bottlenecks. Probably funding and the funding mechanisms that are in place are a real kind of bottleneck for innovative thinking. Crazy, wild ideas are very difficult to fund. I think we have probably the best kind of mechanism for deciding how to distribute funding, but it's not great. It's the best of a bad set of choices, because it's typically driven by committee level decisions, group decisions of panels that are trying to do their best. But I think the consequence of that is you typically fund kind of low risk, well-known, research topics that people on the committee or the evaluating panel can kind of understand and appreciate. If it's something wild and crazy, I think they tend to shy away from that, because it's kind of in an unknown space. Maybe they don't even know how to assess it or how to evaluate it. So I think the kinds of federal sources of funding that are distributed in the U.S. are done predominantly with that kind of panel-based mechanism. And like I said, it's not a bad mechanism, but it leads to massive amounts of funding going into trendy topics that may not have a great endpoint or a great trajectory for long-term impact. And I won't call out specific areas, but you can think about explosion of interest in this and that, and it peaks up and it dissipates. And I think the funding mechanism plays into that, is susceptible to that, because people are trying to validate their own choices of research topics, and they see something kind of in a related area, they're much more inclined to rate that highly than something that they're totally unfamiliar with. And so I think that is a bottleneck. I don't know what the solution is, but in the United States anyway, what we're seeing more and more is sources of private or foundation-based mechanisms for funding research, and those tend to be a little bit less susceptible to that kind of groupthink. And they're driven by individuals, smart, talented individuals, maybe not, with the kind of scientific depth that you would see in a review panel for an NSF grant, but they're smart, intelligent people who have made wise choices over the course of their lives, and now they're in a position that they can fund research and support kind of academic pursuits. And you're seeing that grow as a fraction of the various sources that you can explore for funding research. And so to me, that's a very promising and exciting development. It just diversifies the range of sources for funding your research. And I think the Gates Foundation would be a good example of that. Merck for Mothers, Save the Children Foundation, the Steele Foundation for Hope, the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub. There are many examples of kind of multi-billionaires looking to kind of invest and get involved in research. And that's really interesting. And it may sort of open up that bottleneck a little bit, which I think has sort of constrained kind of truly innovative thinking and research over the past period of time. But that landscape is changing. It should be interesting to see how that plays out.